What you are listening to is the sound of 35mm film being fed through an Arri 435 MOS camera. At one point in time, this was the sound you heard on every movie set. The noise you would hear when everything came together, the cast, the locations, props, and lighting. All tweaks and prepared for a specific moment captured on film. Modern filmmakers really don't get to hear this sound anymore, unless of course you're lucky enough to be on a Christopher Nolan or Tarantino set. And most DPs and cameramen don't even own this gear now. Trade it away for a Red or Alexa or some other new digital camera. Honestly, the only places you can still find these cameras is where I am today. My favorite film gear rental house, Rule Boston Camera. Now, for some reason, a lot of young filmmakers are afraid of rental houses. Some think that you'll need a lot of money or you'll need some tremendous insurance policy just to rent gear. Isn't there some sort of super special handshake needed in order to have a relationship with these guys? Honestly, that couldn't be further from the truth. I find a majority of rental houses are excited to meet and support young filmmakers. It is one of the best places to learn how to make films. Not only will they teach you how to use your gear, but you'll learn new networking skills, tips on how to strengthen your business, and you'll have years and years of knowledge and support behind every project you do. Today, we're talking with my good friend John Rule from Rule Boston Camera. John and I have been friends for the past few years, and he has been a huge supporter of 12KM and all the other projects we do at McFarland Pecci. Now, this isn't just a sponsor episode, guys. I'm really excited to dig deeper into John's past and learn how being involved with cinema for as many years as he has affected and influenced his life. So let's get right to it. Sit back and enjoy the new episode of In Love with the Process. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the new episode of In Love with the Process. Today, I am hanging out in one of my favorite places in Boston. I am here at Rule Boston Camera. And as many of you know, I am a huge advocate of rental houses and renting equipment because I feel like I have everything at my disposal as a DP and as a shooter. And it's also a really cool place to just hang out and chat with film nerds. And that's kind of why we're here today. We're here to talk with John Rule, and also Dave is back from his adventure as well.
I'm back.
Hello, Dave. I want to ask you a ton of questions about Europe, but we're going to save that for the next podcast.
You got it.
I hope it was horrible.
It actually was in a lot of ways.
Oh, I can't wait. Excellent. But hey, John, say hello to everybody.
Good morning. How are you?
You have such a great radio voice.
Why, thank you.
So yeah, like what I was saying is, I genuinely, this isn't some plug. I genuinely really love hanging out in rental houses because I typically do not own my own gear. I try not to, because it's a very difficult thing to have such a big overhead and then still make it as a freelancer today because of, budgets and prices and all that kind of stuff. But it's actually one of the coolest places because then you can learn about the new gear, you can learn about new equipment that's on the market, but it's also full of history. It's full of a lot of like the original gear. Like in the opening of the episode, you guys heard the sound of a film camera running, which is super cool. And there's so many filmmakers. Like, have you ever touched a film camera before, Dave?
Not once.
Not once. Have you ever seen a film camera work?
Just now I did. But that's about it.
So it's really cool to be here today, and I think we have a lot of really cool stuff that we can talk about, John.
Well, thanks. The feeling is mutual, of course. We love having people like you here. Part of the reason why rental houses exist is to support the local community and the artists who are part of that community. And, folks like you who come in and come in with ideas and enthusiasm and excitement and your needs and your imperatives sort of drive what we do here. And, it's only through folks like you saying, hey, I got this idea. I want to try something new. That lets us both up front and in the back room, sort of figure out, okay, do we have all the component pieces? Could we make this work? Nobody's ever tried this before, but let's do it. And you bring the kind of enthusiasm that really drives us and makes us happy to come into work every day.
Well, it's great. I mean, honestly, I consider folks like you guys as part of a team. And for us, it's always project to project. And every time we have a new idea, every time we have a new film, it's almost like starting a new company, every time you do it. And it's really nice. I mean, honestly, it's like you guys have been a part of almost everything we've ever done, just because you guys are the premier rental place here in town. And then I think I've been renting from you guys for at least 17 years at this point. It's been a long time.
Wow.
Dude. Yeah.
We appreciate it so much. I can't even tell you. Thank you, Mike.
Well, I mean, in the beginning, so for me, in the beginning, when I started doing my stuff, I started as an assistant for corporate gigs, basically. I worked for this producer off the Cape named John Sutherland.
Oh, sure, I know
John.
John. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, John's a great guy. I actually haven't talked to him in years. But I started when I got out of film school, and I was looking for a gig, and I went back to my parents' house because, I was broke at that point. And at the time, this was not pre-internet, but internet was still pretty infant, so I was going through the yellow pages. So literally picked up the yellow pages, flipped through, and looked for production companies in the yellow pages. And I found John Sutherland in the yellow pages and called him up. And I was like, oh, you got it? It's cool. Called him up and was like, do you need an assistant? And he ended up hiring me to actually label VHS tapes for his dubs that he did.
The perfect first job in film.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's great.
But then quickly, because he's a smaller production company, I ended up rising the ranks pretty quick, and I ended up doing PA work, and then ended up in the lighting department, and then ended up actually shooting stuff with him. And that's how I think I first found you guys, was through him, because it was like, hey, do me a favor, drive up to Boston, pick up a camera, pick up some sticks, pick up a tripod. And that's back when you guys used to be off of Com Ave. No. You guys used to be in Watertown.
Probably over, the Watertown office.
Right, because Com Ave was Boston Camera. Right, and you guys were over there. So it was the Watertown office. And you guys were down in the back, and it was pretty cool. It was a cool little spot.
Hidden away from prying eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So that was how it started. And it was just sort of coming in and picking up a piece of equipment and then meeting the guys. And at first, as a young filmmaker or as a young person in the industry, it was kind of daunting. Like, it's this big house, it's a big rental house, and they have all this sort of stuff. And at first I remember being just sort of like, okay, let me just grab this piece of equipment and get in and out of there, you know what I mean? And it took a few years for me to sort of open up and start to have conversations with people that worked here. And then the more people that I talked to, the more I became friendly with folks, and the more that we'd come in and start nerding out about stuff. And fast forward to today, when I come in and like, I can't see Brian at the front counter without having like a 45-minute conversation about comic book movies. So that being said, that's how I found you guys. That's how I came to be involved with this company. And yeah, I feel like I'm doing way too much promotion.
Oh no, Mike, keep going. This is fantastic.
So let me just dive right in here, and I'll ask you a couple questions, and then we'll start from there, and then we'll loosen up a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your origins. Like, how did you get into the rental business?
Well, I had gone to Emerson, and originally as an actor out of high school.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Classic, musical nerd, and got a couple of great parts in high school, and figured, oh, well, I'll just be an actor, and went to Emerson, and literally within the first 2 weeks, I realized I do not belong here. These guys are crazy talented, and so I quickly looked around for something else to do, and a lot of my friends there were doing films, and so I really enjoyed the production aspect of it much more than I thought I would, and so I ended up doing a lot of film projects, and eventually working at Blake Films. I don't know if you were around when Blake Films was around.
I don't think so.
So that was the first lighting and grip company here in Boston, and I think at the time that I joined, it was a couple of old New England telephone vans converted with some really old Mold Richardsons and a couple trucks here and there, and so I worked there for a number of years and realized that I really enjoyed the tech. I'd been on a bunch of productions, most notably, get ready for this, Friday the 13th Part 2.
Wow.
Yeah, I worked on that.
Wow. What did you do on that?
So I was night crew, and so for 3 days I was hanging 2K Mighties about 20 feet up in the trees on climbing ladders, nailing plates to the trees and hanging these lights and gelling them. And
where did they shoot that?
That was in Kent, Connecticut.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
At a little camp, a little boys' camp down there, and this was September into October, and it was cold at night, and so we were staying in the little cabins, and there was no heat. It was fun. But after being on enough productions, I realized, it's the gear. That's what's really exciting. I sort of lost interest in being on a production myself. I just really dove into the technology side of it and what the technology could do in the service of art. And I've been doing it, 30 years now, at least. No, more than that. 37 years, if you can believe that.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And, starting with lighting and grip, and then in 1982, I started Boston Camera Rental, and that was with somebody else's money, and but I was the vice president and started the company, and ran that for 8 years, left for a year, and then started my own company, Rule Broadcast Systems. And then about 20 years after that, then we ended up merging with Boston Camera Rental. And now we're just one big happy family.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I had no idea that you were on Friday the 13th. That's really funny. You had a really good point there, like gear in service of the art, like gear in service of that. I think that's a really important thing to talk about, because I often get on tangents on this show, but without getting too far on a tangent, I feel like some of the tide has shifted in the past few years, at least, where I feel like gear starts to come before the project for at least a lot of manufacturers and folks that are selling the gear and doing that sort of thing. So it becomes a really difficult task for a young filmmaker, especially if you're told that, look, you're not a real professional unless you have this specific piece of gear. You're not a real professional unless you own this kind of camera and you have all this sort of stuff. And I feel like that. I don't know if you still feel that. Do you feel like you need to own equipment to be a filmmaker these days?
Well, I don't now after hanging out with you for a couple months. But but seriously, before that, renting wasn't even really an option, for me it wasn't. I didn't even consider that.
How come? Why didn't you consider it?
I didn't know it was. I didn't know it was an option. I thought that you make some money and you buy a camera and you buy gear enough to support yourself. So when you get a job, you have all the stuff there, and that was it. I thought that was.
And you went to film school.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll get in. That's a whole other podcast.
Well, I think part of that is a result of the DSLR generation, the revolution.
Exactly.
When a lot of kids came out of film school or got into the business at that time, and were able to do amazing things with DSLRs, and as a result, they didn't have that exposure to the rental house that the more traditional, 100-year-old model would have given you at that point in time in your career. And I think the pendulum has started to swing back, where people are still buying a lot of gear, but a lot more companies and individuals are renting. Sort of in line with what's going on in the globe, what's going on around the world, where people are renting cars on a sporadic basis, Zipcar,
right.
Or renting houses through Airbnb, or I saw another one this weekend where you can, it's like Airbnb for RVs. So if you want to rent an Airstream for a weekend, you can do that. And I think people in general, particularly the newer generation of people coming into the industry, are just naturally predisposed towards renting equipment and not owning stuff and not having to take care of it and not having to deal with the economy of owning your own gear,
right?
Maintaining it and paying taxes and depreciation and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and I mean, the speed and the rate that things turn around these days is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Like the idea of going out and, everybody got really excited when Red came out, and Red was the camera, and that was going to be the thing that you owned for the rest of your life. And you buy yourself a Red camera, and every producer on the market was like, do you have a Red? And that was how you got hired. Mm. But then that camera's outdated immediately. And at this point, I have a lot of other friends that are DPs that do own gear, and they're all selling their gear off because you can't keep up with the tide, basically, because it just seems to be changing so rapidly, And then you have places like Netflix and a lot of these new media outlets that are demanding to have stuff shot at like 6K, and like they have all these requirements, and you just can't keep up with that stuff. And I think that my philosophy was always like, I just don't even want to get in that game. Really, I don't want to get in that game, because then as a DP, you're beholden to what you own, And so like every time a job would come in, and a director would say, hey, I'd love you to do this thing. You're like, oh, well, I gotta pay off my. Red is perfect for this job, because mm-hmm. I own this camera. And it's perfect for that gig. And then you often find that isn't the case, So basically, I'm sort of running in circles here, but I think that the idea for at least me, and this is something to take away from this, is that gear is a tool, specifically a tool for whatever job you want. And every time you do a job as a creative, your tools are different based upon the needs of what your idea is. And you just don't want to become beholden to that, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons why I quickly became buddies with you guys, because I knew that you guys have, access to everything that's new, and you guys are keeping up on all that, the updates, you guys are keeping up on everything, and I can literally just say to a client like, yeah, sure, we can take care of all that stuff. And then you get on the phone with you guys and go, okay, how do we figure this out? How do we make this work? And there's a bit of safety in that as well, where, if you show up to a shoot and there are rental stickers on all the gear, then that there's sort of an insurance behind all that stuff. That if the piece of equipment goes down, that if the camera's crapping out on you, then you can just make a phone call to a gear company and mm-hmm. go, guys, I need a replacement really quick, or how do we fix this sort of thing?
Yeah, and that's certainly one thing I have to say in support of the traditional rental house, as opposed to some of the new peer-to-peer rental models, where if you've got a very important shoot, very important client, and you've rented from a peer-to-peer agency, mm-hmm. There may not be support behind that piece of gear. So, if you rent from a traditional rental house, and if something goes down, let's say a camera explodes, the rental house will be there within a few minutes with a replacement camera, and that's sort of that's the promise, right? That's mm-hmm. our value proposition. And that's an important part of what a rental house does for people, is to give you that insurance, particularly as you're out there making a living with those tools. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is that yes, we have state-of-the-art equipment, and we have a really good view as to where technology is at the moment and where it's going. But we're sort of also a repository of best practices. So we from exposure to all these different clients, all these different shoots and shooting conditions, we sort of develop this understanding that it is hard to achieve without that exposure. So we know what works best under certain conditions, what motors might work best with what lenses and what cameras, and mm-hmm. and because the filmmaking equipment ecosystem is so complex right now, because there's so many more components than there were back in the days when we were listening to film cameras, right? between the video transmitters and the monitors and LUT boxes and
then just the support rigs,
just everything. And they all need to work well with each other, and they all need to work, period, of course, but they need to work well, and they need to support each other in a holistic way, and that's the kind of thing that's research and development that rental houses do as a matter of their business. Put all these things together, make sure that they work, because when we put them out in the field, our name's on them, and that's really important because we know you, Mike, you're out there in the field, and we don't want to let you down. One of the reasons why we end up hiring over and over, we end up hiring people who are filmmakers themselves. People who are regularly on weekends out doing productions. Part of the reason we do that is that we want our employees to have a deep familiarity with the gear, right? We want them to understand how the menu structure works, how things go together, what could possibly be wrong or what might happen to our customers out in the field. But the other reason is that our employees need to have empathy for what you're going through. So, in a customer service environment, you want to be able to respond quickly to what's happening with the customer. And the way that happens is through a deep-seated sense of empathy.
Yeah.
Like if Mike Pecci is out in a shoot and the camera's down and everybody's looking at him, we need to feel that in the gut of our stomach. We need to understand what that feels like to have people looking at you. And because we're all filmmakers, we know exactly what you're going through out in the set. And so it becomes really super important for us to support you in the best way that we possibly can.
That's awesome. Yeah, because it really, that's what I meant when I say that you guys are part of the team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the same thing if you're casting actors, and the same thing if you're putting your crew together. I mean, you really want to make sure that you can rely on what you have. I mean, being able to rely on gear is important, but I feel like gear is such a finicky thing. Gear is very unemotional. Gear can't be conned with beers. You know what I mean? Gear has its own way of doing things, and it's one of those variables. It's like nature. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And there's something really nice about having that insurance policy behind that gear and just going like, okay, look, I know it's not your fault, guys, but this thing's not doing this. The gear's having a cranky day today. So
sunspots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we keep moving? So yeah. All right. Well, okay. So enough on that stuff. Let's get more into, one thing that I find fascinating about the work that you guys do is that you've had your hands in pretty much everything that rolls through Boston, at least, for years. And we've seen the change, at least in my career, I've seen the change of Boston going from being a city that maybe has a film, once a year, maybe, and a lot of it is local productions, to now being a place that, because of our tax incentive, is pretty busy. I think there was like 4 or 5 like a couple of months ago that are here.
And I think as we're talking right this minute, I think X-Men is gearing up to start production.
Oh, right. That's right.
Sometime soon.
Yeah, that's right. So like every piece of lighting equipment will never be on them in any rental house. So I find that's fascinating. And how close are you to, do you have a personal connection to any of these projects? Are you interested in any of these projects when they come through? Or is it just sort of like, how do we just supply them with gear and get them out of here? Do you have any personal connections?
It really depends on the production. A lot of times when a $100+ million film rolls through, then no, I don't really have a personal connection with the major Hollywood studios. The flip side of that is somebody like Screen Gems. They've come into town and they've done in the last 4 months 3 different small $5 million budget films, and I have a very deep connection with them, and we've supported them, to the best of our abilities, and so it really depends. We've got the out-of-towners, we've got the local folks. The tax incentives have spurred a lot of local productions as well as out-of-town. And so there's a lot more independent film. Commercial production also benefits from the tax incentive because the low end of the tax incentive is only about $50,000 in order to qualify for the tax credit. And that's fantastic, and that's something that not a lot of other states have. And the reason that's there is to spur local productions, independent features, TV series, whatever it is that we're doing locally. So I think that one of the reasons I wanted to be in this particular business is that it's about relationships, you know, and, it was never my interest to be in a commodity business in any way, you know, to squeeze 5 cents out of a transaction, you know, that's just never interested me. And I think what's always been great about this particular industry and being a rental house in the center of the industry is that we have exposure to all kinds of really exciting, creative, hyper, volatile people, and that's been really great for me. You know, I've so much. That's the best part of this whole my career arc. I think is the people that I've met along the way, and the projects that I've been a part of. Just seeing what creative people can do that ends up on the screen is just really exciting to me, you know. And it's maybe a bit nerdy and a bit sentimental, but that's what's important about this industry.
That's good. I mean, that's a great mindset, and surprisingly, because we just did a couple out in Vegas. We did a couple podcasts out in Vegas with a couple of friends of mine that work in the manufacturing business, and they work in the sales business for stuff. And there are a few guys that we've talked to that feel the same way, that felt like like Rod Clark when we did Rod's piece. Rod comes from a family of lighting technicians and gaffers, and so when he got old enough, he was, put on set, and he got to be put in that position, and then he quickly realized that the life of a freelancer wasn't the life for him. And so he had to find something that was more stable, but he really wanted to get into a business that was also helping creatives do what they wanted to do. And ultimately, that's his main goal for it, which is like an admirable thing, because when the cynic in me, when I see folks that are trying to sell me things, I feel like that's their main goal. I feel like a salesman is just someone that it's like, all right, cool, I got a warehouse full of this shit. You know what I mean? I gotta
move it.
I gotta get it out of here, so whatever I gotta tell you to get it out of here, But every once in a while you stumble across folks that really, really do care about the projects and the process of making this stuff. And the filmmaking business to me is such a weird one, because I came from being a car mechanic, and I came from being like a house painter and working in construction. And the crew mentality is pretty similar, except ours is so romantic. Like the film business is such a romantic thing. Like you still have electrics that are running cable and outside getting filthy and like running all this stuff, but they're doing it because they ultimately love the film. And I've worked with so many guys that are willing to go out there and break their backs for, 15 hours, and do this stuff, and then but also be like, what's the shot look like? And they come in and they take a look, and they have feedback, and it's really a beautiful business, and it's very romantic. I almost feel like it's a Western, you know what I mean? Where you have like these really cool guys get together, and you sort of collect them. It's like the dark guy that's really good at like sound, and like, the quiet man that somehow knows how to manipulate sun,
It's
and
so funny. This weekend I watched 13 Samurai on Netflix, and it's very much like that,
Yeah, you all come together and you're fighting off hordes of whatever,
Exactly.
Like one of us dies, and then at the end of it, it's like, oh, see you later, man. And everybody sort of walks off. And a couple of weeks later, another job comes in, and half those guys get together. And it's like, remember when we almost died? And it's this very romantic business.
Well, that's the one thing that I do miss about actually being out on production is there's no other business other than maybe road construction where people sit around for a good part of the day, depending on what department is out there, on set working. Mm-hmm. And so you have these tremendous opportunities during the course of the day to get to know your fellow your colleagues and hang around and talk and expound on things, and then you're in the fever pitch of battle, right? And then you have time off again, and there's no other job where you can not get yelled at for sitting around talking, And I really enjoyed, again, the personal relationships that you get on set. My wife was a AC for 17 years or so.
Oh, no kidding.
And, just she would always talk about these deep personal relationships that she had from working on set. There's, again, to use the warmongering lexicon, it's like going into battle together, where you're battle tested.
Yeah, and to you get even further on a tangent, the other thing I really like about it is that you see these very surreal life moments when you're on film sets, strangely. And it's like the one job I've ever had where it just seems to breed these very odd moments. And a very a specific story. When I started years ago, I started in the lighting department. So I somehow convinced on an independent film that I could be a gaffer. I don't know how I did it, but I convinced these guys that I could. Which at the time I was like, I have to learn about like power distribution quickly. It's like one of those things. And we were shooting in not too far from here, like downtown, really dirty Alston, very dirty Alston, and very low buck production. And we're in this split home, and it's in a rough neighborhood. And we're in there, we're shooting all day, all night, long shoots. And I have lights set up outside, and there's a massive thunderstorm rolling in. And I'm like, okay, we gotta chill. Like, I gotta unplug everything. We gotta chill. I don't have a lot of experience, but I know that we should probably stop shooting. Like, this is the moment we should probably just, hang out. And so we close all the stuff down. It's that moment of breather that you have on an independent film set because you're running 100 miles an hour. The most important thing is to get the shot. And so you strangely have like this sort of moment of silence. And I remember just sitting out on the front porch with a bunch of other crew members, and we're watching as these dark clouds are rolling in, and lightning and everything coming out of it. And
you going to insert a sound effect right there later in the editing process?
Cue thunder. so as we're sitting there, the door to the house next to us bursts open, right? And this woman, I remember it being a woman, this woman comes running out, and she's yanking a kiddie pool with her. And she comes running out on the front lawn, sets up this kiddie pool on the front lawn, goes back in the house. And then this guy comes out, and he's got like those old school like metal lawn chairs. He puts a lawn chair right in the middle of the kiddie pool, and they're like strung out. Like, these guys are like really strung out. And so they have the kiddie pool, and they set up a radio, and he's sitting in this kiddie pool with a radio running next to the kiddie pool. And then we watch as the roommate runs across the street and disappears into the neighbor's yard. And so we're sitting there watching this, and he comes running back out with the hose from the neighbor's house, which is running. And he's running as far as he can get, and the hose yanks him. So he's in the middle of the road because the hose won't go the distance. And he's trying to like project this water from the street using his thumbs to create a stream. And he's projecting this water into the kiddie pool with a guy sitting in a metal chair, a woman sitting in a metal chair, one and the other, and a radio playing as this massive thunder electrical storm starts rolling in from the distance. And I remember just sitting there with this crew of people going, where are we? It felt like we stepped through like a David Lynch door.
I think you're describing a dream.
Yeah, no,
this couldn't have happened.
It's totally true. I swear to God. But yeah, and that memory, I mean, that was, God, 14 years ago or something like that. And that memory is vivid and burned in there. And it's just one of these weird little experiences that you only have when you're on film sets.
Well, I think that's one of the greatest things about the industry is that almost every crew person that I know is a really good storyteller because there's just so much material. I've got a ton of material, and I was in it. I was doing production for maybe a year or two, and you do get exposed to things that nobody else has ever seen. Filmmakers are always being brought behind the scenes of operations, and it's really exciting. And you've got stories for life.
Yeah, I joke around that I've been in probably every building in Cambridge. Like, I can't drive down the street in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and see a building that I haven't been in because of the years that I did documentary work with Harvard. So every place. And then you and you have like this weird sense of access where like you get, especially when you're doing doc stuff, Dave, because you were just doing this, and someone's like, you ask them like, hey, do you want to be in a documentary? And they're like, yeah. And then suddenly it's like they just open their bedroom doors, like everything's available to you. And they're like, sure, you want to see what's in this closet back here, and you want to see what's going on over here. And so you have this really weird sense of access into other people's lives that you would never get. And especially in this city, I feel like this city's still kind of innocent. You know, like if you go into New York or LA, someone's like, great, well, how big is your wallet? And that'll, you know, that'll depend on whether or not you get in here. But in this city, you can still walk into a spot and say like, hey, I'm going to do a movie. And then suddenly people just look at you like, wow, really? Like this, it's still very magical. You know what I mean? Do you feel that way? I mean, you've been doing doc stuff.
Yeah, I got my first taste of that. And, you know, this is for probably future podcasts, but the second, you know, we talked about what we were doing, it's like it was like we knew them for 10 years. And we, through mutual connections that we had never met, we got into like the depths of Parliament and like a backstage tour from this guy in the House of Lords who we'd never met. And it was amazing how much he vouched for us to get us in there through all these guards. And we were just these dudes with big bags of equipment walking in straight into Parliament. So it was, it's really cool.
I can't wait to hear all about that stuff. I can't wait to hear all about it. So yeah. So let's get back on track here. So, well, John, actually, you and I were hanging out recently. Actually, we went to a movie recently. It was like you, me, and RJ. We went and saw John Wick 2.
That's right. Yeah, classic.
Which was actually a wonderful viewing experience with you guys.
Yeah.
I just thought about it the other day because I just watched John Wick 2 again because I guess it's out now on demand, and the movie is just so much fun to watch.
I forget whether you had seen the first one or not.
Before we went? I don't know if I had before we went, but I have seen it since.
You have seen it since.
Yeah.
Which did you like better?
I like the second one better.
Me too.
Yeah. I mean,
by a long shot.
Yeah. Have you seen?
I've seen neither.
Oh, dude. They fight with taxi cabs. They have like a kung fu fight with taxi cabs. Yeah. Here we are promoting John Wick 2. But, when we were hanging out that day, you and I sat down and had some beers, and I found out that you used to be an illustrator, right? You wanted to be an illustrator. Tell me about that stuff.
Well, I had been a cartoonist, probably since I was 11 years old, and I used to emulate the cartoons in the margins of Mad Magazine. And right now I can't remember the name of the artist, but he was a big influence on me. And so I had drawn cartoons all through high school, and then when I was at Emerson, I did a cartoon for the Emerson newspaper called The Adventures of God, and so it's something I've always done. I have sketchbooks filled with just doodles and
you still do them?
No, I haven't done it for a really, really long time.
But it's like riding a bike. It's still in there, right?
It's still in there, yeah. The fluency might be a little bit diminished, but I could still do it.
Yeah.
And it's definitely like a muscle that just needs to be worked. And if I sat down, for any length of time, I'm sure I could start it up again.
Well, what would inspire you when you were drawing? Is it people that would inspire you, or is it moments, or is it?
I think juxtaposition, really. Doing, maybe it's surreal, but juxtaposing people and objects that shouldn't be together, and or objects that talk and do things that you wouldn't expect them to do, and I wasn't big on, a traditional comic book form. I think, if anything, I was more of a New Yorker one-panel kind of guy.
Oh, yeah.
And, but again, and what's funny is that I think what started me on my career when I was 11 years old or so was crawling around in the attic of my house and finding a bunch of sketchbooks from my dad.
Oh, no kidding.
And he hadn't drawn in maybe 25, 30 years. And I discovered these drawings, and I'm like, wow, this is kind of cool. I could do this. And someday my kids are going to discover this box of sketchbooks in my basement. And
it's like an Indiana Jones movie at this point.
Yeah, exactly. There's certainly like the Monet's blue period, there's definitely the drug period in my drawing, but where things got increasingly more surreal. But and maybe that's why I stopped. Who knows? But I think that the act of creation is sort of universal, whether it's filmmaking or drawing. Whether it's a singular act of creation like writing a book or drawing or painting or whatever, or if it's a collaborative creation like filmmaking, it's all kind of the same thing. You have an idea. Maybe it's not fully fledged out. Maybe you just dive in with the germ of an idea. But for some people, the process is about discovery. And for drawing, for me, that was a lot of it. I'd start with a line, and that small line would inform what the next line was going to be, and then halfway into the drawing, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I know where this is going. Of course, we don't recommend that filmmakers do that.
But the truth of the matter is, though, that is the game still, and I feel like as a director, I still do that same thing, where you have your idea, you have that germ of an idea, and then you try to do as much of your homework as possible, and you're like, okay, well, this is how I think this thing would go, but I don't know all the variables, and the problem with film is that there are so many different variables that, like you were saying, you do a line and you see where that line's going to lead. It's the same thing with filmmaking, where you go, okay, I'm going to start here, but I'm going to work with this person. Or I'm going to hire this person to be production designer, or I'm going to work with this concept artist, or I'm going to work with this musician. And you just know that they're going to take that next line in a very strange direction. And you hope, at least I do, I hope that they'll take it in another direction. And then while you're just sort of that person strapped to the front of the train, you're just sort of trying to conduct it and go, ooh, there's a really cool tangent. What if you just pull it back just a little bit this way, and then we'll go that way, and then, hey, everybody catch up with this person, and then everybody else is trying to get their lines onto that point.
Serendipity plays a huge part in what ultimately ends up on screen.
And then you have something exciting.
Yeah.
I think that there's something so boring about having everything on the page first and then having everything boarded completely, and then you just go through that process. And then you're like, okay. Yeah, halfway through filming, you're like, okay, this is just miserable. There's nothing new happening. Or, and you're looking for like that really cool moment, But I think that exists, like you were saying. I think that exists if you're an illustrator. I think that exists if you're a chef. I think that exists, if you're a musician or if you're a filmmaker. And for me, at least, that's I am 39 today. It is my birthday, plug. So, but
happy birthday, Mike.
Thank you. But I mean, that's what keeps me happy. It sure as hell isn't money, and it sure as hell it's not wealth and having all these different things. It's really just having the ability on a Monday at like 10 o'clock to be able to sit down and just go, hey, let's just talk and see where this goes.
I love it.
Yeah. What do you think, Dave? You're really quiet over there.
No, I was lost in the story of you being strapped to the front of a train conductor.
Stop. You just haven't been here for months. He's just sucking up. All right. So let me go and take a look here and see if I had any other. Let's go back to my notes. All right. Well, let's get back into. This is interesting because you've been in the rental business, and you've seen a bunch of different transitions. So there was a period in time where all film was shot basically with film. There was a period of time where, TV commercials were for TV. Like as we've seen this progression, A, from film to digital, and then B, from like large scale productions to sort of scaled back, this is for the internet kind of thing. Have you seen a change in the way filmmakers are working, or is it still the same process for everybody, do you think?
I think it's changed dramatically. I think that the democratization of video, of equipment, has done tremendous things for, allowing people to come into the industry that otherwise couldn't afford to produce content, and at the same time that all these people are coming into the industry, you've got what a lot of people refer to as the golden age of television. Mm-hmm. So the visual vocabulary that we are all learning every day and watching on Netflix or HBO or whatever, that is informing this explosion of creativity as all these fresh new people come into the industry and they're really excited about what they're seeing on screen, and everybody's trying to emulate this really, really high bar of creativity and production value and script writing, and everything's good. Everything's really good. And so I see that access to gear, access, maybe people are getting a DSLR and maybe they're not actually producing content, but they have it in their bag and they're able to play and practice and flex their muscles. And there's just this heightened sense of we can achieve really, really wonderful projects, And I guess the way I look at it is there's two examples. One is that for years and years and years at the Coney Island hot dog eating contest, the limit was 25. Nobody could ever eat more than 25 hot dogs. And then one guy, and I forget how long ago it was, but he shattered that record and he came in with like 35. And, last couple of weeks ago, it was 70.
Oh my God.
But the point was that after everybody realized that 25 was achievable, now everybody does 25. It's no longer a big deal. And the other example was from this incredible book. And almost said I'm blanking on the name. It was made into a movie directed by Angelina Jolie, Unbreakable.
Yeah.
And it's this incredible story about Louis Zamperini and when he was a runner before he went to war, and he was on track to be the first person to break the 4-minute mile, and nobody thought it was possible. And just before he went off to war, he did it unofficially on sand.
Wow.
And of course, eventually the record did get broken, but now everybody does a 4-minute mile. It's not a big deal anymore. And the point I'm trying to make is that there are mental barriers that we put up collectively to say that we can't do certain things. And I think in the filmmaking space, that notion that we regular Joes can't produce super high quality content is gone. Everybody understands that you get a bunch of friends together, you get some relatively decent gear together at pretty low cost, you can make something phenomenal. And as long as your directing is tight, your script writing is good, you can make world-class art. And I think that's a change that, probably just over the last 5-6 years, we've seen that. And it really makes, combine that with the fact that technology is so incredible right now, the ability to, for a DP in particular to forge his artistic vision in in what's going to end up on screen. It's not being left in the hands of the colorist. Sometimes it is. But these are incredible times for technology, for art, for the expression of ideas. And, I've never seen anything like it, and I've been around for 30 years plus.
Well, since that transition, since a lot of, I guess, amateurs or younger people now have access to all this cool gear, it must be cool to see sort of like growth with returning customers and people that use your gear a lot. And, the first time they come here and, rent this cool camera and then, see them years later, what they're doing now.
Yeah, and that's been really gratifying, particularly when you see somebody come in and they just clearly they've got it. That's so fulfilling to have somebody come in, fresh and new to the industry, but you see something in them. You see a spark, and that they're going to go places. And so we will always try to support somebody who just very clearly looks like they're super talented or needs. I look for somebody who needs, and I think you're definitely one of them. Like you cannot get up in the morning without creating something or thinking about a shot or something.
Yeah, I drive Gina crazy.
Yeah, like you physically can't not.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of people that we look for and try to support wherever possible. So yeah, seeing them go through their career is really rewarding.
This seems like a good spot to take a break so I can do a few reads for our sponsors. These guys continue to support the show, and I'm more than happy to talk about how awesome they are. First up, Puget Systems. Are you in the market for a new edit system? Tired of every software update making your machine run slower? Do you want a system that runs faster than the 3 choices that you get from Apple? Then I seriously suggest you look into buying a PC. They have faster, easily upgraded, and Puget Systems support and technical help blows Apple Care out of the water. I have been cutting on their systems for almost 2 years now, and I haven't had a problem yet. Go to PugetSystems.com. They have made it easy for you to get started by allowing you to select the software you use and automatically pairing it up with the right computer model for your needs. Seriously, go check them out. PugetSystems.com. AZO monitors. How many of you know what a calibrated monitor is? How many of you have one? Just because you have an Apple Cinema display, it doesn't mean that the colors that you are seeing are true. AZO makes outstanding self-calibrating monitors that come built with the tools to take accurate luminance and color measurements in the room that you're working in. They make sure that when you spend hours tweaking your colors, that they'll look that good on phones, laptops, and even in the theater. At McFarland and Pecci, we just got our hands on their new 4K CG318, and it's awesome. Go to azo.com and spend some of that money you saved on your Puget Systems machine and grab yourself a peace of mind when it comes to color grading. Well, cool. So let's see. Let's go back. Let's get a little nerdy again here. So okay, here we go. Because we listened to the sound of a film camera running for the opening of this, and it's an old Arri. What was it, like an Arri F3, right? Is what that is?
435.
435, okay. It shows how often I've used that rig. But is there anything, so we've seen, change and radical change lately. It seems to be changing every season at this point with equipment. Is there a piece of gear that has always been your favorite? Is there a piece of gear that just it still lasts the test of time? Is there something that has always been going out of your rental room? You know what I mean?
Boy, that's a tough one. That's a good one.
It's a good one, right?
Well, the obvious answer would be lenses, I guess. This is not going to be a surprise to anybody, but lenses have sort of found a much more deep and resonant place in what we do. Because when digital came out, people were enamored with the idea that you could adjust the image in a million different ways. But the pendulum with digital always swings back to the organic and the analog. It happened with CDs, and you see people listening to a vinyl right now. And the same thing is happening with, and has been happening for quite a while, with digital cinematography, where the lens, depending on what kind of lens it is, really informs the overall look of the piece. And certain lenses are known for certain attributes. Whether it's a softness or the way it renders skin tones or the way the bokeh looks, and that's something that wasn't quite as important back in the days of the film cameras, but now it's really it's taken on a life of its own, which makes us as a rental company really regret all the film lenses that we sold, 20 years ago when they were basically worthless. Canon K35s, and I think we had a set of Mitchell's Super Baltars at one point.
Oh, wow! And
it just people would kill for those lenses right now. So I think that's probably the main thing. I mean, there's products that the products I take note of are the ones that are really important for their time. The most recent example was probably the Canon C300. It came in at a really perfect storm sort of time where people were just looking for that kind of color, that kind of convenience, that form factor, and so that camera took off like crazy. The original, the Sony F55 was another camera that came in just when it was needed, something in a mid-price range, super high quality, lots of control over the image, things like that. But I also just love staples, like an O'Connor 1030 head or a Weaver Stedman head, just stuff that's literally been around for 30, 40 years. just solid equipment that does what it's supposed to do and doesn't pretend to be anything else other than what it is. It's great.
I mean, I say that to a lot of young folks all the time. They ask, well, what kind of gear would you buy? I'm like, C-stands.
Yeah, sure.
Like I have, I have a collection of like 6 C-stands that I've had since I started. And, I use them on every job, and they've paid for themselves probably 7 times, and it's just, there's certain pieces of gear that I feel like even 10 years from now, you're going to walk on a set and go, okay, that's still here. This is a really well-made thing that's still kicking around.
You're making me wonder now when the first C-stand was invented.
I don't know.
We're going to have to find that out.
Yeah, that's an internet search.
Can we cut in a little piece later on when you edit this after I've done the research and I can pretend like I knew instantly when the C-stand was first invented? Can we do that?
John, that would be lying.
That would be fake news.
On this show. That's fake news.
Yeah, okay, we won't do that.
But your points about lenses are really is really on par, I think, because as a shooter, when I started, I came out like right when digital was kind of rolling out, and it was you're either a real DP in quotes, and you're a guy that shoots film, and that's what you do. And everybody that was shooting film at the time was like, digital is just, it's home video cameras. It doesn't matter. And this was back when I was doing early film work with like a Canon XL1 or XL1S. And those cameras at that time just had that zoom lens where everything's in focus. It was a really difficult thing to actually use or try to incorporate the language of cinema with something like that, because it was just associated visually. You look at it and go, okay, this is TV or home video, So we were always working little tricks where we're changing shutter speeds and we're trying like different adapters, and then it got to putting glass on it. And then as a DP that was doing digital, I really started to respect the filter that light comes through and how it changes the image and how it shaped the image. And even today, I still look at digital cameras as just the recording device. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, how am I going to take this beautiful picture and lay it down on something that is archived? And I, you want the highest resolution possible for certain things, sure. Megapixels, blah, 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 all that kind of crap. But I really have a passion for lenses, and I really have a passion for actually busted lenses. Like I love old school, dirty, dingy lenses, because in my mind, if you get in the car with me and go for a ride, I haven't cleaned my windshield in like 6 months.
For artistic reasons?
No, it's just life. It's just life. Like I'm seeing the world through filthy glass all the time, and my eyesight gets a little weird sometimes, and like you're always looking at the world through imperfect stuff. And so when I see a lot of this new technology, and I've seen some of these new lenses that are just too perfect, and everything just feels too perfect, and I can't connect with it. It's almost like CGI at that point, where you're looking at it going, okay, well, this is obviously not real. There's nothing real about what this is. And I think that there's been a trend in filmmaking where people feel like they need to correct all the imperfections that are caught while you're shooting, because they feel like, for them as a filmmaker, whenever you're doing anything and you're looking at your movie afterwards, you're like, oh God, I fucked that up, or this looks like shit. And like you're so hyper focused on those things, but you tend to forget that when you show it to an audience, as long as your characters are great, as long as your story's great, as long as you have the ability to charm folks with what you're telling, then they're going to be infatuated with what they look at, and they're going to subconsciously fall in love with that stuff. Like if I go back and watch like Die Hard, which is one of my favorite films as a kid, there are moments like when he takes, I can't remember the bad guy, it's terrible, the long-haired blonde guy.
Hans Gruber? No, the other
guy. No, Tell Carl your brother's dead? I think it was Carl. And him and Bruce Willis are having that like really brutal fight scene, and Bruce Willis wraps the chain around his neck, and he like runs down the stairs, and he pulls the guy over, and the camera like bumps into stuff like 6 or 7 times, and there's all these crazy lens flares that now everybody's like, well, I need to have those lens flares, but at the time it was like, well, there's a light in the shot and you got this lens flare, just because that's what happens with the lenses. And so you watch it has so much character that now when I watch films, I feel like all that is missing from it. And you almost watch this stuff that's too perfect, and you go, I just don't believe that there was any human hands on any of this.
So could you draw a parallel between that and music, where if the music is too perfect, if it's, if there's no soul to it, then you can't really relate to it in the same way that you relate to a live band, for instance, where anything can happen, and sometimes you have imperfections,
I completely, and to go even further down that rabbit hole, I feel like with a lot of our entertainment now, there isn't any sort of emotional context. So I feel like at this point, I can, right in the middle of our interview, I can pull my phone up and I can start watching anything. Like anything is at my disposal. And with music in particular, I had this conversation the other day. I feel like the only time now that I have a real personal connection to music, because I no longer can go into a store and like go through the process of pulling up albums and looking at artwork and feeling very connected physically to something. I feel like the only time I have that personal connection is if I go see someone live. Like if I go see an artist live, I'll remember who they are. I'll remember how I felt. But these days it's more like, well, I was listening to Spotify, and most of the time folks are like, yeah, I was just listening to Spotify. I heard this great song on Spotify and there's this great Spotify channel. And you're like, yeah, but who's the artist? And, what is that? Like, what are they trying to, what's the story? Like, who's the artist? I'm sure it's just a generational thing, and I'm sure it's because I'm getting older, John. But I just feel like I have a lot more trouble connecting to music without that reality, without hearing those imperfections, without being there and seeing a musician that breaks his strings and still performs, and you just don't even notice. Or going into the last concert I saw was this band called Carpenter Brute. Me and Tony went. And they just sort of do like this new retrowave sort of 80s vibe, synthy kind of vibe. And we went and saw them at the Paradise here. And I was not expecting them to play live. So they had like they do like this sort of synthy thing, but they had a guitarist, they had a drummer, and they had this bass sound that was specifically crafted to make my guts move. And it's something that, I always loved hearing their stuff online. But when I went in there and I had this sort of visceral experience of all these imperfections, and really just because this one venue had this bass set up, it really changed my whole experience with these guys. And now they've gone from being sort of a digestible piece of entertainment that I have daily, fucking within, every half hour, to something that like, fuck, okay, now they're in this new consciousness for me. And now it's like, okay, I had this experience with them. I was a part of it. So now it means something more. And I'm off on a tangent here, but I feel like that same sort of element can come across in your work as a filmmaker with all these imperfections and with the way emotionally you feel when you're making something. And if you leave that emotion in your piece, then I feel like it's a lot easier to connect and remember what that piece is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and for some reason I'm just thinking now about Stranger Things, and yes, it's an homage, and yes, it capitalizes on work that's already been done, but what you felt watching that series is love and affection for those movies, the Spielberg movies, and and you could feel that coming through. So it didn't feel forced or clinical. You could feel the emotion coming through, and I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah. I relate it to cooking, right? So I like to cook for people because it's relaxing to me, and I feel like it's one of the best emotional experiences that you can have with a stranger.
I feel like you should have been cooking for us right now. I think I'm actually getting hungry, and I wish you'd brought some food.
Yes, I'm such a good host. But I like that you can sit down with a stranger, and you can sit down with a stranger that doesn't speak your language, and you can cook a meal, and you can share emotion with this person. You can share love, you can share respect, you can share anger, you can share this stuff with a meal. And I feel like someone can make me a meal that, technically is terrible. You know what I mean? Like it's burnt and too much salt, or the seasoning's off. But you're there to witness how they make it for you, and that you witness that love and that affection that's put into it. And it's fantastic. It's better than anything that you could have.
Yeah.
As opposed to going into a McDonald's, where you go into a McDonald's, these guys are underpaid. you know, that there's a lot of stress and anxiety in that work environment. And so you're just eating that and you're going, oh, like this is not, I mean, sure, it's satisfying some sort of primal need that I have, but ultimately I'm tasting all of that crap that's there.
It's funny, I'm not on Facebook a lot, but I have one rule, and that is you're not a friend of mine on Facebook unless we've actually shared a meal together.
That's awesome.
That's a good rule.
It's a good way to, you know, to keep it tight.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And meals, I think, are so important. Like before I do a project with a lot of folks that I'm working with crews or teams, I either want to share a meal with them or I'd like to cook with them, because I think that it's the best way. It's the best way to break the ice.
One of my early jobs was as a prep cook in the Verst House in Cambridge. So I'm just offering my services. If you need a prep cook, I can do that.
Yeah, I cook too much these days. These pants are tight at this point. But yeah, okay. So we got off on a couple of really great tangents there. You know what? I think we should just wrap it out here. And I want to thank you for letting us hang out today and talk to you about some stuff. And then really, let me get back in and just do a bit more plugging for you guys. If you are in the Northeast, and Boston obviously, but anywhere in the Northeast, and you're looking for a good place to rent from, Rule Boston Camera is definitely my favorite. But if you're not, like I said before in the beginning of this podcast, I feel like it is crucial for you to develop a relationship with your local rental company. And I say local meaning whoever's in your town, right? Because ultimately you're going to get that connection that you're going to need. It's a fantastic resource for you. There's a lot of learning that you can get and a lot of training that you can get from these guys. And then there's something just very comfortable for your clients to know that whatever is on set, that unknown thing that constantly has its mind of its own and will go down, is protected by a rental house. And actually, you know, learning is an interesting thing because you guys have the learning labs here, right?
Yeah, we do almost weekly learning labs where, we'll bring in a manufacturer to talk about a particular product, or one of our guys will do a learning lab on a set of products, sort of, examining features and benefits of all the different types of things. And I think that's, for us, again, going back to relationships and being a part of the industry, it's always been really important for us to be as integral and as essential to the industry as we possibly can be. And it's not just renting on a transactional basis. It's being a part of the educational process. It's being part of the community, supporting film festivals, all that kind of stuff. And education is just one component, but it's a super important one.
It's actually smart too, because like you were saying, Dave, like you didn't know that this was available to you, like rental houses are available to you. And I know that it might be just a little daunting. I know in the beginning for me, it was a little daunting to just sort of walk in as like a young, arrogant whippersnapper walking in going, I'm going to make movies. So everybody come and help me out. But, having stuff like a learning lab, and if you are a local filmmaker or you want to be a local filmmaker, it's actually a good way to get in and meet you guys and actually meet the folks that work here and actually be able to stand around and have a good conversation. Like it's a good conversation starter, I think. Yeah,
that makes it a lot more comfortable as a young filmmaker to be able to come in and, one, need the gear, but then ask for it too, to have the ability to learn about it and from people who use it all the time.
Yeah, I think actually that should be part of every film school. And we do teach classes for some of the local colleges here. People will come in on a field trip and we'll explain what the role of a rental house is in film production today. And because it's a relationship, and if you don't know about it, it's easy to step in the wrong direction. But once you understand what we're here for and how we support you, I think that's where the really beneficial relationships come out of.
You guys do a lot of internships here too, right?
Yeah. Oh, we're super proud of that. We've been doing it for about 30 years, and we take it really, really seriously. And the education that our interns get is tremendous. And it's also a great way to get to know some really, really interesting young people.
How difficult is it to get an internship here?
Well, there's only a few spots. I think we do maybe 6 during a given semester, and we do a spring and a summer, and a spring and a fall. You need to be interviewed, and you need to comport yourself well, and and then we bring you on, and then we take our responsibility to train you really, really seriously.
Yeah, because I've known a lot of the interns that come out of here, and you do come out of here with such an amazing understanding of how things work and how the pieces work and how the gear works. So, and I know that for a lot of folks, that is why they get into this business, is they want to get into the gear side and they want to be very technical. And I know if you want to be in AC, or if you want to be in camera department or even lighting department, then gear is your life basically, and you need to know how all those things work. So if you're a young filmmaker out there, then see if you can get in. And I think if you can't get into that, then there are the learning labs, and there are these different opportunities to become a part of what you guys do. So I think that's going to do it, right?
I think so.
All right. Is there anything that you want to plug, John? Is there anything that you want to push?
I want to plug you. I think you're doing a great job, and I so appreciate what you're doing, and I think it's inspirational for a lot of people.
Well, thank you, man. And for all of us, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast is to just hang out with people that I like, really, and just, I feel like we have these conversations all the time whenever I show up, and I have these conversations with other people, and I feel like just documenting them and putting them down. And if you're someone that has the patience to listen to an 1.5 hour long podcast while you're working out or on the bus, then perfect. I think this is a good way to chew through your morning.
Yes, preferably while eating something, right?
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks for being on the show. Dave, thanks for being here. And
of course. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for listening to this episode of In Love with the Process. I highly suggest you go hang out and make friends with the guys at your local rental house. It will change the way you shoot your projects. Let me take a moment and catch you up on what I've been doing these days. I just finished up an awesome short film called The Chef's Night Off with Chef Paul DeRochers. That's Paulie Cooks on Instagram. It's a beautiful and dark piece on a chef preparing a meal for some dinner guests on his day off. It was shot with most of the team from 12KM, and I can only describe it as a cooking show on the set of Alien 3. If that isn't an enticing reason to go watch it, I don't know what is. So you can either go to my website, mikepecci.com, or mcfarlandandpecci.com to check it out. Also, be sure to follow me on Instagram at Mike Pecci for behind-the-scenes coverage on all the latest projects. You know, the Chef's Night Off project, some of the new big stuff that I'm working on these days. And also, if you got some time, we finally updated it. If you go on over to Facebook and follow In Love with the Process, we put up a bunch of photos shot during the taping of episodes, a lot of stuff that we did on our Vegas trip. And really, if you're curious about what it looks like when we record this show, then the In Love with the Process Facebook page is perfect for you. So once again, thanks for listening, and please remember to share these episodes. The more people that listen, the better the shows become. See you later.